So first off, I'm Bill Whitmer. I'm on the council here, and I'd like to introduce a few people from the city first. Our city manager is George Rodericks, and he's worked with our Atherton Arts Foundation to display regional artists' works here, both here at the City Hall as well as at the library. And also is the host for the facility here today. So thank you, Teresa Delasanta, who is here. She's over in the back. She's the assistant to the city manager, and also the city clerk. And she organizes a lot and sends out. If you're on the Atherton mailing list, you'll get letters from her on a regular basis. So also, Betty and Ted Ullman, I think everybody knows from the Atherton Arts Foundation. So I'd like to, maybe you've seen their picture. Oh, okay, sorry. And you may have recognized the Ullmans from the magazine, the Atherton magazine that just came out, and they're going to sign autographs afterwards. But first off, thank you for coming today, and so we want to thank both the town as well as the Arts Foundation for putting on. This is our second wine and cheese art event here. And so we do appreciate you coming. But the Arts Foundation, for us, does a lot to enrich our lives here in Atherton. They do so much more than just these events. They put on art shows at our park on a regular basis. And they buy sculptures, and they put them in our park that we see every day. And they encourage other artists with their activity here. So they do so much to enrich our lives, and I really want to thank them for this. And they've arranged with George to have, on a rotating basis, local artists to display their artwork both here at City Hall as well as at the library on a couple-month period of time. Michael's artwork will be over at City Hall for about 3 months from now. So, first off, today we have the pleasure of viewing and getting the insight and the inspiration behind the paintings of Michael Killen, who is a Menlo Park resident. Not that we'd love to have you in Atherton, but I wasn't pointing that out that you were an outsider. Okay, we're an inclusive community here. Michael and I met at an art show at the park a number of years ago, and then I saw him on a periodic basis at major conferences at the USGS, where he was a featured keynote speaker as well as displaying his art on very serious subjects. The first time was on ocean acidification, and the second time was the dangers of climate change as they affect our electrical grid. And so we have some more of his artwork here today. But his artwork spoke to me very clearly, and there are very key messages here that I think are very important for all of us to hear. And I thought, as I told Michael the other day, that we just completed our climate action plan, and this kind of dovetails in right with what we're trying to do here in Atherton, which is become more and more sustainable. Like myself, Michael was a transplant from the Northeast. He was a senior executive at Wang Computers, and those of you who know Wang Computers, most of the younger people don't know what a Wang computer was, but you know that was a while back, but that was in the pioneer days of the computer industry. Later, he was a senior executive with IBM. He's written 6 books on business ventures, computer sciences, and mathematics. He's also published over 200 papers on various business opportunities. He's been a talk show host and continues to be. He's interviewed people from all over the world, ranging from Nobel Prize winners to poets, to singers, and yes, even some politicians. Michael has been a keynote speaker at various events around the world at the request of companies such as SAP and AT&T, as well as some very large nation or worldwide banks. In addition to his paintings, Michael has his own TV show here called Sustainability. He's passionate about protecting our environment and showing that through his current artwork, which, by the way, hangs in very many prestigious government facilities around the country. his artworks tell a story. His artworks tell a story of the consequences if we don't take action with regards to climate change. So with that, I'm going to let Michael take the reins here. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to introduce Michael Killen. Thank you very much for coming and for showing here.
Thank you. Come this way. Hi. First of all, I'm really delighted to be here, and I have to thank a few people. First of all, I did hear through the grapevine it was Bill who raised my name within the Atherton art community about the possibility of me doing something here. And I have to thank Betty, who then stepped up and approached me and offered me the opportunity to be here. And Teresa and Judy have been just wonderful helping me. I'm a little anxious tonight. I'll tell you why. I make television shows, and for some odd reason, the head of the organization that produces or distributes my show is here. Annie, I think this is the first time she's ever come out to one of my events, and I'm so delighted. And I do make a strange type of painting. All my paintings articulate an issue or developments that I think are important. And when I make one of these paintings, I'm usually working closely with some big organization or individuals like NASA and Stanford, and I am trying to make art that helps the scientists, the political leaders, the industry experts be heard. You know, what they're trying to share are very important messages, and you really require an education to grasp a lot of the important developments like the national energy policy, ocean change, climate change, the expanding economic gap, and others. And so I'm very blessed that a lot of folks step up and help me. Rapu comes from SRI, and he's the author of an extremely important book about global energy requirements. He is one of my consultants. He helps me a lot. Jeb works closely with the Peace Corps and also the Citizen Climate Lobby. He helps me in a lot of different ways. There's an artist here who helps me a lot. Cecile is a great muralist. Makes big paintings and that go on walls, and I often seek her advice on making some of my paintings. I don't have that great a background in making art. Two of my models and painters are also here who help me. Here they are. This is Isabella. Isabella has worked on a whole series of my paintings where she has always painted something on them. And Sophia and Isabella have also been models for me. I can't afford them any longer. I don't know, let's see, did I forget anyone? My son is here tonight with his partner. And, okay, this painting is a controversial painting. And I was thinking about 4 months ago, what could I do to help political leaders share a national energy message? So I noticed that George Shultz had about 15 persons working for him, trying to put together recommendations for the new president with respect to the next national energy policy. And I said to myself, wait a second, I'll try to understand what George at the Hoover Institute is planning to recommend to the next president. And so Two. What?
The next president.
So, I sat down with him a while ago, and we talked a bit about what he was trying to do. And I said to him, you know, I'm just wondering, you're doing an awful lot of work. What's going to happen if Trump is the next president? And he looked at me and he said, I said, I didn't hear you, George. Could you say, he'll, I said, George. And he said, he'll ignore it. The project we're working on, we go to give it to him, he'll ignore it. And I said to him, why? And his answer gave me a really interesting insight. He said, first of all, he's a climate denier. And I knew that. But it made me say to myself, well, what is George developing energy recommendations for the next president? It is to meet the energy needs of the nation, but his first word was climate change. And that told me this conservative, this former Republican, this one of the most respected men that has been in Washington that we have today, his main concern is to try to do something to slow runaway climate change. I happen to know he has a framework in his head where every single minute, every single day, we should be doing something to reduce the threat of climate change. I take a little issue with George and all the folks who say we have to worry about climate change. Well, there is also ocean change. And the ocean is changing just like the climate is changing. And there are, maybe my friend Ripu, who helps educate me on a lot of science issues, might even agree that the threat of a tipping point could occur in the ocean before it occurs in the climate. So, I set out to help George and other political leaders and scientists, energy experts, that want the United States to have a more effective energy policy. So, in looking over George's shoulder, I identified 3 important recommendations he planned to offer the new president. And by the way, I saw Hillary's people with George and other members that are working on this. So, you know, he's in bed with Hillary. Okay. No, I don't mean that. I mean, no. Oh, come on. You're not being fair to me. I'm just. So.
Maybe not tonight.
So, I tend to think about greenhouse gases as a monster. I have a very simplistic view. It is a monster. And I think of the monster as having an intake fan so it can breathe in all the carbon dioxide, all of the other greenhouse gases, and get as much of it as it can. I also see it as an awesome, really frightening monster. I hate to say this, you know, the experts really don't, none of them believe they have a solution. We have solutions to stop the growth of this baby, and we have to stop it. And so, George, number one recommendation is a tax on carbon, the sources, primary sources of carbon. Like, this is oil. When they dig up the oil out of the ground and go to sell it, he wants to add a tax to it. And that's oil. This is gas, and you can tell it's gas because we have a little burner there. And this is coal. And his thinking, and now my thinking, is to create a tax that would be like a wall that will create separation between the suppliers of the fossil fuels and the monster. And this wall has to come from a combination of Congress and the next president. And that's why I have this photo paper up there, and it comes out like that. It's to create separation, make it difficult for the fossil fuel manufacturers to sell their product, so we look for alternative approaches, including approaches to reduce the amount of energy that we use. So, one of George's recommendations is a tax, okay? And we talked, and it's controversial. What is the federal government going to do with that money? And there are various organizations that want to take that money and invest in R&D, invest in the poor, all sorts of things. And George says his approach is everyone with a Social Security number gets a piece of the tax. So the money will come into the Treasury Department, and then it will be distributed to people to help them get an education, to help them survive, whatever. Okay? It's you got a Social Security number, you get a piece of the money. Now, the second approach is, we all appreciate energy efficiency. We squeeze more energy out of the coal, out of the oil, out of the solar panels. We squeeze as much of it out of it. We get energy, more energy, and we save money. So I thought about how do we pictorially think about energy efficiency. So George and a lot of folks want the Congress and the President to implement new legislation that will give us strong energy efficiency mandates, regulations, etc. So coming out of Congress and the President, I envision this leg and foot. And this foot is coming down, and it's squeezing, like we're dealing with oranges and we're squeezing all the energy out of the coal, all the energy possible out of the solar panels, out of the wind turbines, and everything else. And we squeeze it out, and coming out of this box is both money and more energy. So that's the second one. And the third one, and this is the most controversial one, especially in this state, George, Rapu, and Jeb, and many, many scientists that I know are very concerned with nuclear energy. And there's so many reasons to be concerned about. And by the way, as I go traveling, whenever I say nuclear energy, somebody in the audience always brings up the waste. And as I listen to them and talk to them, I notice a problem. they are combining nuclear waste that has been created by all sorts of sources, like building bombs and creating energy. They put the two together, and when you put the two together, it's an impossible argument to have because there is so much waste, especially from the bombs. So I'll come back to that point in a moment. George believes that over the next 10, 20 years, we should save every single nuclear power plant the state has, because it's nuclear energy, besides hydro, is the only clean energy source. All the other sources, renewable, are not clean. And let me share why. This state has moved heavily to generating energy using gas. Well, every big plant they build, these solar farms that's generating energy from the sun, they're always building a fossil fuel plant behind the plant, because when the sun goes down, there has to be energy generated. So they're building gas plants, and the gas, you burn the gas, you add more emissions. You feed this more fossil fuel fumes, and there is a belief by a lot of people that this monster is already too big for us. And so, George would like to throw a lifesaver to all the existing nuclear power plants, and for us to keep trying to use them for maybe another 20 years. 20 years, because I think the thinking is that in 20 years we will be able to build, some people say we can build them right now, plants, nuclear energy plants that are really, really, really safe. And so this is my little idea: throw a life preserver to the nuclear power plants again. Besides hydro, they are the only clean source of energy we have in the world. Would you agree? And would you agree the thinking is to save these as much as possible? Also, what a lot of people are thinking about is the next generation of really, really safe nuclear power plants. And so I thought I might pictorially design one and explain why it is safe. And so this is it, okay? And these are like places where we have uranium. Or what?
Thorium.
What? Or
Thorium.
thorium. Okay. And these are like cylinders, and this stuff goes traveling around and back into these, and in these tubes, a tremendous amount of heat is created, 500 degrees, and that heat is used to make turbines spin around and develop the energy. We agree? And we have to have a means of cooling, keeping everything at a good temperature. And so here is water that circulates and cools these pipes that have all this very hot chemicals running around. But we're dealing with great, great temperatures. So about these plants overheating and boom, or something happening to them. Well, it turns out they simply, and now this is the artistic way of explaining it, you simply make these pipes down here melt when this stuff gets hot. When this stuff gets really hot, you can have the system so that the pipes down there get hot and everything melts and goes down and the plant shuts off, right? You're the expert. And so I've worked at making this diagram and to point this out, that this thing can never explode or go wild because when it gets to a certain temperature, the pipes melt, everything falls out, the process shuts down. Okay? Now I think the scientists and the engineers, they take a slightly different approach. They build these they build a system like this. But instead of having the pipes melt, they put some thorium as sort of like a cork, I believe, down here. And if that thorium starts getting too hot, it melts. And whew, everything goes out. Okay? So, I think George's recommendation is for a tax, a fee on carbon. I think it's a great idea. New legislation, strong legislation to really focus on getting all of us to be more sensitive and forced in a way to be more energy efficient. Protect the existing nuclear power plants and to invest heavily in building the next generation of safe, and they call them walk-away nuclear power plants, that if everybody goes home, walks away, the system stops by itself. So, I made the painting, and it's a typical kind of thing I do. I pick a topic that's quite complex, important, and I work with a lot of people to understand the topic and then to find a way to articulate it. So at this point, questions? Becky?
Those three people on the corner, and is that a turbine there?
That's a turbine.
And so what, are they happy? I mean, what are did you say who those three people were?
That's me. No.
They're getting the money.
Look, we have to find a way to invest and have people become retrained and new jobs. And I asked George, your tax, will that go for jobs? He says, no. Will it go for R&D? No. He sees the creation of these jobs and R&D is coming out of the normal budget process. But, I mean, we saw yesterday that folks, a lot of people in the United States are left behind, and we have to find ways to help them catch up. I don't know if they ever could catch up, and jobs, etc.
I mean, they look like, I hate to use the word proletariat, but they look like workers, they look like laborers. I mean, that maybe the money is coming to them from the treasury, but I thought just your use of the color and the helmet shape, very interesting, very industrial.
Thank you.
Type thing, so.
And you know who she is?
It's
Huh? No, my granddaughter. Picasso made the Women of Avignon, the painting, the Women of Avignon. And one of the prostitutes in the painting has a little bit of this face. I'm always going to Picasso's, the Women of, anyway.
concern. What do you do to get to that next, because they take 20 years to build, I assume? And the older ones may not be safe, sounds like.
Well, by the way, if we compare the danger of the existing ones to the danger of all the coal dust and pollutants, I think somebody could quote here that it's this many people killed as a result of the stuff we're using right now. And the number killed by these things is like about way down there. They're quite safe. I think they're quite safe. But
Even the so-called unsafe ones are very safe. If you look at their, normalize it to the amount of energy they produce, because that's what we want. It's the energy that produces. If you have lots of energy coming out of the system at affordable price, you can have lots of people employed. You can get many more people employed if you give everybody a cycle to exercise. But you know, all they will do is produce maybe 1 kilowatt-hour a day. So, I mean, by the time you pay them affordable wages, they are we're in a money-losing proposition. It doesn't help. It doesn't scale.
Well, I think one of the concerns, of course, is Fukushima, and when
Right.
they go critical, and they go critical big. I mean, that has global
Correct.
implications. Isn't that a real concern? Like Diablo Canyon, fault lines, I mean, they're just legitimate concerns, even though I actually, this is kind of exciting and interesting that you could build a nuclear power plant that would be safe. Yeah, it's very.
But if you look at
very
even
concerning.
Fukushima case, there were no fatalities from the nuclear part. The fatalities of 15,000 people or something, which is more from the aftermath of the tsunami. Now, yes, people have been displaced, I understand that. But if you look at the radiation fears, I mean, they have been blown way out of proportion, and our reaction, our visceral reaction to it, and if I cannot relate that, that's my problem, and I come to Michael to help me communicate that. But I think it is highly, highly misplaced. The amount, a good friend of mine, I'll tell the story. May I take 5 minutes?
Sure.
A couple minutes? So, a good friend of mine who lives in that area wrote to me immediately after that. He says, Ripu, can you find me a Geiger counter? Because I want to look at it. He's concerned about his grandchild, as I would be. And I said, well, yeah, you searched Google and there were lots and lots of Geiger counters, and everybody's having special sales for Japan at that time. But I thought it was also a teachable moment. Look at it and say, this is not going to tell you, Kunichi, what you really want to know. Because what you want to know is what kind of energy is coming out and how much, what's the dosage that he's going to be getting, and then using some kind of a theory, what the probability is. The upshot is, if his grandchild were to live in that area with the kinds of numbers that Japan Times was publishing at that time, and of course radiation is going to go down, but I'm saying let's keep this maximum amount that we are looking at in all the surrounding areas, his probability for contracting cancer increases from 20% to 20.2%. So is that a risk worth keeping as opposed to building something else or using sources that if you want the energy you are producing and feeding that monster that Michael's doing? Because that's also a much bigger danger that we all face. So yeah, there are trade-offs, and that's where we are stuck at the moment until we get to something like this, where when things fall, it gets subcritical. What happens when it flows down is it spreads out and it is subcritical. It does not perpetuate, and so it is. The nuclear reaction stops.
Yes, Jeff.
Partly, I'm not an engineer. I have read some about this nuclear issue, and I don't think Michael intends to oversimplify that this is a solution that's sitting on the shelf.
Yeah, there's something.
25 years worth of really interesting R&D was done on this particular approach to nuclear energy at the Oak Ridge National Lab in Tennessee, starting in the 60s. this business of shutting it down and going home for the weekend and watching football happened dozens of times. That was the way that the guys decided to leave for the weekend. Let it take care of itself, walk away. But an aspect yet to be developed, and it's not actually designed and not physically built, is that this thorium-fueled approach to nuclear energy can burn the waste from other reactors that have been sitting around for decades.
For weapons.
Or what? Or
Also
weapons.
for weapons. Yeah.
Right. So
You can really-
this is a way of trying to reduce the accumulated backlog that we have that is so threatening to us. But again, it has not been done yet. And whether or not anybody's Congress is going to come up with the planning and money to do it is undetermined at this time. But it is a really interesting future doorway that, and the question, Mark Jacobson over here at Stanford says we don't need nuclear at all. I don't know what to believe, but trying to be smart with Ripu's help and a community of people who want to pay attention to, I have 4 grandsons, some of the old folks here, I see a little white hair, maybe a couple other grandchildren in the room. We get to pay attention to this and try to figure out what kind of information to communicate to our next generation people, what are some directions that make sense. So that's why I'm here. That's why I like seeing Michael do these things, because to me they are just a terrific opportunity to have a discussion. Michael, what the hell is going on over here? And he'll tell us. It's part of the fun. He really will.
Okay, I just want to say one thing about the nuclear waste. I decided to ask the question of how much nuclear waste is in the United States as a result of being used by nuclear power plants. The answer I received was shocking. If you gathered up all the waste from these, one football field, 5 feet high, 6 feet high, that's it. Hard to believe. I have come to believe that what my friends have told me and what the United States government Department of Energy publishes, it's 1 football field that high. It's not a big deal. Okay? But if you add the bombs, and the bombs, we need all of Atherton maybe, I don't know. Okay.
We're not interested in having it stored here.
Unless there's technical questions, I would touch on the topic of art, if it interests you. Okay? All right. So, when I just want to paint, I don't think about people, about painting people, things, oceanscapes, seascapes, landscape. I don't think about any of them. It's always issues and developments. And this painting had an earlier generation, which was more of a scientific display. First I try to master and understand the issues. And then as I start laying out the painting, articulating the science or the politics or whatever it is, that's always somewhat primary for me, but I'm always struggling to select the iconography that allows me to start the beginning of a story and, move from one topic to another topic. And I make an inventory of the issues that are going to be in the painting and how they are interconnected with each other, and then I search for the imagery, and I work very hard to be able to have everything flow. And I think I'm probably very unusual as an artist. When I start a painting, I'm always thinking about myself and the painting up on a stage giving a speech. That is because for 35 years I was in the world of publishing and selling studies, business studies around the world. Every 6 weeks, I think I was flying to Singapore, Kuala Lumpur, Wiesbaden, Frankfurt, Dubai, to give a speech, that would bring attention to our study, and we would sell it. I got the speeches in my DNA. So, from day one, it is a speech that I'm making my PowerPoint slide, you might say. And the other thing is, just like in a book, a novel, you write stories with an arc where you create tension and then you let the tension go. That's all in this kind of painting. Also, context. I have often said to myself, when there's chaos in my mind, half of the chaos goes away. I think some philosopher once said this: if you define your terms, half the confusion goes away. But they never say how to get rid of the other. The other is to figure out what is the context that whatever you're discussing, trying to learn, fits in. You get the context of whatever the topic is, the confusion goes away. And then I think in life, if you can really understand the context that's meaningful to other people, you really have a lot going for you. So I'm always thinking about context. I'm always thinking about it can't work as just a scientific or a political message, or as a message. It has to work as a painting. It has to have, everything has to be placed, and colors have to fit and work as a painting. All right, I don't have to talk all night. But do you have questions? All right.